Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Serverless. My name is Paul Chin Jr., senior serverless developer person at Serverless Guru. And this week, I'm really excited. We've got somebody from Firefly. Firefly, they were our reInvent booth neighbors last year. And I keep seeing them at the different AWS summits. And I got to learn just a little bit about what they're trying to do in the cloud space. And now I'm super thankful I got Naor. He's coming on. He's going to tell us a lot more about himself, what infrastructure as code could really mean, and how all of that kind of helps us operate better serverlessly and in the cloud. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Naor. Naor, go ahead and kind of introduce yourself real quick and tell us what you're up to with Firefly.
Thank you so much, Paul, for the intro. I'm very happy to be here. Very happy to meet you in all those AWS summits. You bring a lot of joy to the summits. And again, it's always a pleasure to reconnect. So regarding myself, I'm currently Director of Product at Firefly for the past 2.5, almost 3 years. Prior to that, I worked for F5 or F5 Networks as a Senior Product Manager for Web Application Firewall, which is basically application security. And prior to that, I spent 8 years in cybersecurity research and analytics in both in Israel, both Unit 8200 and the government. So it was very diverse, so to speak. I started from networks and went through cybersecurity and clouds and data, and now really in the past few years a deep dive into the DevOps and cloud world, and more specifically, infrastructure as code and cloud management with IaC. This is what Firefly does. That's it, basically.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, I have a whole series on different IAC, essentially IAC workflows on the Serverless Guru blog, where I build kind of like the same small little upload service, but with SAM, CDK, Terraform, Architect, and but your Firefly platform, it's a little different. It's like more than just a compile target or a build tool or a resource manager, and in doing that, I want to take a step back for all of our listeners to think about what infrastructure as code, IaC, really means. And for the folks that are still trying to adopt it, maybe some different misconceptions that they might have about it. One of the ones that came up in my mind was that IaC is probably only for like really big, large enterprises that need lots of orchestration and, they need tons of engineers to be handling all this. Like, what would you say to that idea that it's only for large enterprises?
Paul, I think it's a great question. Before you become a large enterprise, you're probably a smaller enterprise to begin with, right? And then if you don't invest the time building everything from scratch, like you do with a building or anything else in your life, right? So you're going to have a problem when you scale, right? Because you start with one cloud engineer, DevOps engineer, you have one account, a few EC2 servers, a few Lambda functions, and an RDS database. Everything is easy, right? But when you have 10 cloud engineers and you see that complexity going up, it's very hard to make changes. Any change can end up being a disaster, basically, to your production environment. We see that happening every time. And then they connect with us and they say, like, look, help us. We want to start using IaC to improve reliability, to optimize our cloud, and basically know what's going on with our clouds, right? And Firefly is first and foremost a cloud scanner. And again, just the cloud, multi-cloud, multi-account automation platform, right? And it all starts with visibility. You get to see all of your assets, no matter where, even for SaaS solutions such as Datadog or Akamai or Cloudflare, from all clouds, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, from Kubernetes clusters as well. And of course, serverless is a large part of that, but it is a part of the larger picture, so to speak, of the entire cloud infrastructure that has a lot to do with storage and VMs and compute and databases, and again, very complex.
Sure. Okay. So even if you're not a large, complex enterprise now, you know you want to be, right? Like that's the whole point and the whole goal. So you might as well start early and really understand these basic concepts of mapping out all of your resources in a nice, tidy, version controlled way, right? I'm like I like to describe Serverless Guru and myself, and maybe like this current generation of programmers as sort of born in the cloud, right? Like people that have been doing web development for, say, the last 10 years or so, really have been affected by giant public clouds. And what that really means to developers is taking like a shift in how they're going to approach deployments, how they're going to approach operations. And so I think another misconception might be that, serverless is great and I can send stuff directly into, the AWS console. I can send my Lambda code directly up. Like, why would I need another framework, right? Like oftentimes developers, they might be saying like, oh, I don't need another framework. Like I don't want to need another framework. But IaC is more than just a framework, right? Like it's more than just a build tool. So what would you say to those folks who say that like, I can get it done through the console, or I can just do something small. I don't need to pull out a whole nother set of tools for infrastructure.
It's a great question, Paul. So first of all, those Lambda functions or serverless functions, they don't live in a vacuum, right? You need some storage or buckets for it. You need identity and access, such as IAM roles. And you have many things that are a part of that ecosystem, right? And they're not a part of the application code. And you know very well why you manage your application code in Git. You want version control, you want code reviews, you want pull requests, you want all that mechanism that Git gives you. And infrastructure as code is having the same set of advantages just for your infrastructure configuration, right? And it starts from your IAM policies or maybe even your actual Lambda or serverless configurations, concurrent runs, or stuff that can cost you a lot of money or make your function stuck or unstuck, right? And sometimes you want to make those changes, but if you don't track it, if you don't use IaC, you'll never know who made the change, when, why, right? For what reason. Maybe no one approved it. You don't have that trail of history, and basically anyone can do whatever they want, right? But the thing that we have for application code for a very long time now is the ability to have audit around those processes of change management, right? When you change code, you have your friend doing a code review, you have your team lead approving your merge request, and you basically have a lot of confidence in what you do that will not just break everything. And even if it will, you'll know where to start, where to look for, right? And if you don't use IaC, it's just a lot harder because right now, even when you use serverless, right, a part of that ecosystem, if you just look at the functions, you probably have many of those, right? Those functions are a part of a microservices architecture. They talk to each other, they talk to databases, they do all sorts of things. And there is complexity there as well, not only for the application code itself, but for all the configuration around it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it starts off looking really complex, but the amount of time that it saves you later on, in debugging and in providing that clear audit trail, like you said, I can look at a Git history and figure out what happened. And if we need to roll back, it's a very deterministic deploy. So every time the same resources respond with the same inputs and they give you the same outputs every single time. That's kind of like the beauty of infrastructure as code, right? It is deterministic if you're doing it right. you know, so what would you say, like for those who still haven't, adopted infrastructure as code, that they might say, well, we have a Jenkins server, and we have some processes that will boot a VM and put some software into it. That's good enough, right? Like, what would you say to those folks that are using like Ansible and SaltStack and all of those provisioning script books?
Yeah. So It's a good question. I think that today what you see in the ecosystem is mostly Terraform for IaC because you have multi-cloud support and multi-providers. You see some newer stuff such as Crossplane gaining traction as well. By the way, in terms of serverless, I think there's a great website from Anton Babenko, who's a Terraform influencer, called serverless.tf. I really recommend that one if you want to get started with serverless in Terraform. And just in general, to refer to what you said about Jenkins and CI/CD, Terraform, as any other code, should be continuously integrated, continuously deployed, right? And you can build a Terraform pipeline that does this, all the phases of plan, apply, and in between you can have those compliance checks and all those open source tools. That's if you want to do it yourself. Tools like Firefly, solutions like Firefly can help you get things to work faster and without putting all the effort and time of doing it yourself, because DevOps engineers, cloud engineers are all into DIY, right? Let's duct tape all those open source together and let's hope it will work. And then sometimes it breaks, right? And we see a change. We see a shift from just let's bring more, let's throw bodies at the problem, right? Instead of bringing more people to build those internal tools, which essentially turns the DevOps team into another development group for itself, right? We see those leaders embrace SaaS solutions such as Firefly. And that's what we're doing, basically helping them adopt infrastructure as code in a convenient and safe way to make sure their applications are reliable all the time, they're up, they're secure and optimized.
Nice, nice. Right. Like, so, Firefly, y'all provide the expertise in managing cloud resources because your clients, your customers, their their main business is not managing cloud resources, right? The whole reason they're in the cloud is to try to offload some of that responsibility. And then when they get in, they start to realize, like, oh, this might be a lot more than we initially expected, right? So for the opposite extreme, when people hear about serverless and they hear about the benefits, they're like, oh, I don't have to manage anything, nothing, absolutely nothing. And it is a lot less, but it is not zero, right? So in a serverless environment, what does infrastructure as code and the Firefly platform offer for those who think that they don't need it because there is no management, right? Like, it's the total opposite. Like, I don't need anything.
It's a good question. I think that serverless is mostly not everything that you have, not all the compute that you have, right? Because we see a mix of legacy applications running on VMs. We see Kubernetes clusters and containers in serverless, right? And they all interact with each other. And sometimes they represent a service or something that you want to package so you'll be able to recreate it or scale it, right? If you take into account disaster recovery for a second, right? What happens to me if my AWS account is dead and I can't restore it? I have the data. The data I have, okay? But I don't have where to put the data because my servers are down. Okay, maybe I can get my serverless functions up and running very fast, but they will have no containers or EC2s or RDS databases to communicate with, right? So I have the data, I don't have where to put it, I have my serverless functions, but they don't live in a vacuum, right? So I think that if you start with IaC and you feel like there's an overhead, but you get to a point where you have all your modules in place, everything is in code, you have the processes going on, you're not running from your local console or terminal, and you're actually working with your CI/CD as you do with your lambdas, right? As you do with your application code, then it will become hell of a lot easier and will give you all the advantages you've been looking for.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. I mean, sounds like so far just using IaC is a win-win. And when I'm talking to folks at the AWS Summit, over the last, I'd say 4 years, I think people are finally now coming on board with full on CI/CD. Right now, I have people coming up to the booth that's saying like they're an SRE or they're a DevOps or they're a platform engineer. Right, they're starting to understand the fact that they need to put process and software controls around cloud resources. Right, and maybe we should tackle another different myth or misconception or this false idea that once you start using IaC, everything becomes more inflexible. Like you can't make changes as easily because it's a static object that's being stored by Terraform, or all of a sudden now you've lost flexibility. What would you say to folks who would say or think about IaC as inflexible?
It's a great question. So just like you're not logging into a container and make changes to the code there, right? You make changes in Git. Same thing here. But there are break glass scenarios, right? And we have those customers. They say, look, I get the phone call in the middle of the night. I need to add that IP CIDR to a security group. And I need to do it right now. I don't have time for code. I don't have time for pull requests. I want to go back to sleep. No problem. You do it. It's a part of the process. And then you have something called a drift. The drift means that you made a manual change on something you manage with code. You have to go back and fix it later on. If you don't do it, then your code drifts away from your cloud, and then you have a large problem that you don't know how to solve. And Firefly helps you do that by sending you a notification. Look, you have a drift. This is the drift. You want to fix it? Click here, it's fixed. The code is now up to date. We have that auto remediation for drifts. We're leveraging AI. That's why we're Firefly.ai, and really helping you get that done fast without the overhead of like even trying to think, okay, this security group, where's the code I create because I have 200 security groups maybe, right? We help you in the notification. It's just one click and you get it fixed. I think that Terraform can give you that flexibility as well if you know how to use it. But Terraform is not the only option. If you're like all into Kubernetes and containers and Argo CD and or Flux CD, and you want to reconcile everything and you want to do only YAMLs, you can do that with Crossplane. You can do that with AWS ACK, which is the CRDs for Kubernetes for those cloud infrastructure resources, right? And if you're all into Kubernetes, you can do that and then have GitOps, just like you have for applications, right? In Kubernetes. That's another option. If you think that you want to give your developers the ability to write their application code with the same language behind the infrastructure code, such as TypeScript or Python or Go, you can do that with TF, Terraform CDK, or AWS CDK if you're using only AWS, if you're an AWS shop, or with Pulumi. That started with that notion of developer languages, right, for infrastructure. And I think that you touched that. We have so many different personas touching the cloud today, right? We used to have like network engineers and sysadmins and DBAs, right? They all merged into DevOps, and now everything split again. SREs, DevOps, FinOps, right? Just for the
Yeah,
cost.
the platform engineering.
The platform engineering, correct. So many people, and the developers, they have their own dev environments. The automation guys, the folks, they have their own automation tools and accounts, and you don't have to manage everything with code. Maybe just your production. And then how do you create code from a service that you developed in a dev account, but now you want to deploy it? So what usually happens is those developers, they say, okay, I'm done. Now you DevOps engineer, you take those 100 resources, turn them into a module. Good luck. No, Firefly can help you turn that into a module using our codification. So these are real world problems that prevent people from adopting IaC. And DevOps engineers are a bottleneck. That's why we have platform teams today, right? And if you create a compliant module so a developer can launch a VM that is compliant, that is secured, that is according to the best practice of the organizations regarding tags, for example, or cost. And if you have those guardrails as a part of your CI/CD, then everything will be okay. And all of those things we're helping our customers do. I think that we learned in the past 3 years what it really means to manage real world clouds. And I can give you an example of some real customers. I won't use their names. I wish I could, right? One of them, the number one sports brand in the US. You can have your own number one, so I don't have to tell you who they are. They're using Firefly, and when we had the POC with them in the process, they said, look, all the fantasy sports and all the data that we enter, it's all in the cloud, right? And we need IaC for disaster recovery. We need you to help us codify that. And they codify their network layer, and they're doing a great job, and they're very happy. On the other hand, we have an amazing gaming company, right? Huge. One of the most famous games. We have a few, but I'm talking about just one of them. They got to 99.9% codified. And they're getting notifications, and they're like, everything is in code. Everything is in code. And their game is very dynamic in terms of cloud infrastructure. You see those things like popping up and down and up and down and up and down and scale up and scale down, and everything is so complicated, but they managed to simplify it using infrastructure as code with Firefly. And those gaming folks, one of the first customers that we had, and they're still using and happy. And I just had a conversation with another customer that said basically, look, you are the cloud single pane of glass. They don't log into the console anymore. They either change the code or log into Firefly. They have Google Cloud projects, like hundreds of those, and tens of Azure subscriptions, and a whole large organization of AWS and Kubernetes clusters that are on-prem, and everything is just in front of them. I get great satisfaction from seeing customers succeed using Firefly.
That's good to hear because it sounds like the problems that we as developers all face um, really come down to how do we manage the little bit of resources that we're given, right? Like it's great, the cloud's great, it's unlimited potential, but in the real world, like you said, you don't get everything you want. You're only going to get bits and pieces, and you're going to have to integrate with things that you didn't expect and things that you have no control over. Being able to have a tool that can look over everything and give you the confidence in what you're operating in the cloud is really important. And I think this is a good segue into how does infrastructure as code really benefit security and compliance, right? So from a developer standpoint, infrastructure as code lets me kind of take control of my whole deployment process, my whole stack. But then for the business and for the lawyers and for the compliance agents, it also gives them a very more concrete say in how these things are done, right? So, can you talk about how IaC benefits just compliance in general, like just working with the business? Because I think that's an area that developers probably don't want to think about as much, but I want to bring it up because it is very important.
I couldn't agree more, Paul. I think that the word here is governance. That's key for clouds, especially if you think about the business as a whole, right? The number two largest expense is your cloud expense. The number one, salaries. Number two, cloud. You don't get to see those huge data centers anymore for every company, but you get to see a very large cloud invoice coming every month and growing month over month. And you now give some of that responsibility to the cloud provider. And you have to make sure you're not doing mistakes there. If you have SOC 2 or HIPAA, or depends on the industry in which you're working, but you have to remain compliant. And the way to do it is you have a few options. What you get from those cloud security posture management solutions, they scan your cloud configurations, okay? And they say, look, you have a problem. But by the time they're showing you that, it's too late. The problem's already out there, right? You should have prevented it. On the other hand, you get to see all those IaC scanners. They're scanning your code, right? And then they tell you you have a problem, you have to fix it, okay? Where were you when I wrote the module that created that VM? And those are two different people. I'm a platform engineer, I wrote a module, and then a cloud engineer, a developer used my module, and then you tell him there's a problem. Okay, what about you check the code, everything is okay, but then you go and make a manual change that caused a problem. And then what? Like, and those are different policies in different places, in different products. Firefly is the only solution, the only vendor in the market that can take one policy. It can be a custom policy, okay? And again, it doesn't matter if you do it yourself or with Firefly. It's just very important that you take the same policy and force it on your modules, the code using the modules, the plans that compile the variables and everything that you're actually going to change in your cloud configurations as a whole. If you don't do it, then you have holes, right? You won't be able to really stay compliant because you're making manual changes, you're switching modules, code that calls different modules, different variables, and you have so many people touching it. You won't be able to keep that, right? You need also something that can help you remediate the problems automatically with code, right? Because if you have a problem and then you go and fix a problem with ClickOps, you broke your code, you create another problem, okay? You need something to keep the same policy from code to cloud in IaC and to help you remediate, no matter where it is, help you remediate it automatically. Firefly does that RAMOps, remediation operations, on top of IaC. And I think that for DevOps and cloud engineers, it's super important because they're managing the cloud. They're not security people, but they're responsible for what they're doing in the cloud, right? They need the tools to help them solve that problem before it happens. And as you just said, compliance is very important. I think that we've done a tremendous amount of work to get to a point where we have a very good solution for our customers who are leveraging Firefly to do that in their CI/CD, in their Git, um, scanning modules, scanning Terraform plans, and cloud configurations. And by the way, CSPMs are doing only security. What about reliability? What about your own best practice? Maybe, Paul, you want every Lambda in the organization to be tagged with a name Paul, Paul dash something, right? Because you decided that's the way you want to manage your cloud. I want to help you get there and help you manage your cloud the way you want it to be managed.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely lots of improvement that AWS could provide on their own platform, even, right? Like, that's why all of us are showing up at these summits. That's why Amazon even, encourages all of this extra innovation because it only strengthens their position as a platform that others are now building on top of and relying on. Serverless Guru, we do is AWS, and we've built a specific expertise in handling the edge cases on AWS. And I then wanted to ask you a question about Firefly and infrastructure as code, like on the cutting edge right now, because earlier on, before things had like guaranteed cloud formation support, AWS just sort of released these services, and sometimes they had CloudFormation, sometimes there was an API, sometimes they didn't even have that, right? And so, how are you and Firefly keeping up with the platform changes that AWS is going to have as it operates? Yeah.
Another great question, Paul. So basically, there's a concept called provider with Terraform. This is the connector between the Terraform code and the API for the cloud provider. And we track those changes. If something's unsupported, if something's new, if something is changed in a way, we track it. Some cloud providers, they have a set of two providers, the production one and the beta one. You see that in Google, you see that in Azure as well. So we're not surprised because we know how to support both, including betas. And in addition to that, we help our customers and we adapt the version of our Terraform providers that we're using to generate code, to fix code, and to fetch cloud configurations. We match it with what they're using, right? So then we have a perfect match into what they're supporting. If something's new, they reach out to us or we get an alert that there's a new thing in the state file or a new cloud resource type, and we develop support for it. And we develop support for it pretty fast. We have dedicated engineers that are doing that, and we take that very seriously. By the way, I just wanted to add something about what you said before. AWS is great, right? But the reality today is multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud. You see Oracle, you see IBM, you see, and at the end of the day, when things are more and more Kubernetes, you'll see that it doesn't matter which cloud provider you're using because it will matter. You want just this and that cluster and you get it and it works. So maybe you'll be able to easily migrate, right? It's not like, yeah, I'm moving from an EC2 to a Google VM and now I have to make adaptations, right? I have my Helm charts. They can be here, they can be there, right? That's why it's very important to support multi-cloud and to be not only cloud agnostic, but also IaC agnostic. We are cloud agnostic and IaC agnostic. It means that you can use whatever you want. And we see that mix from acquisitions, for example. Gaming companies, they have um, multiple games, right? They acquire this game, that game. They use Google Cloud with Pulumi. Those folks, they use AWS with CloudFormation. Those people, they use Crossplane with Alibaba Cloud. Okay? You have to support all of it right now when it's the same company. And if they want to make any change, you give them, through the visibility, you give them the confidence to make those consolidations.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, hybrid cloud, clouds, multiple clouds. I mean, they're all going to get larger and larger. They're going to be more diverse. They will have more options than ever. You had already mentioned um, Anton from Serverless TF. I'm going to try to get him on the show.
I'll throw in a word for you. I'll throw in a word.
Okay, great, great, awesome. That'd be wonderful. And then I also want to get other. I guess they're. I don't know what you would call them now, but it's basically AWS without AWS, right? There are other cloud provider platforms, but they're tailored for specific developer experiences like Vercel and Netlify and Winglang and Darklang and, different provider type platforms where they'll give you serverless functions. They'll give you databases that come up instantly, fully managed, all the things. And, you know, I'm trying to put Firefly in my mind, sort of in like where in the market all of that is, because you've got observability, you've got like compliance, you've got auto correcting things, but Firefly isn't a language; it's a platform, right? It's an integration point, and it uses things like Pulumi and it uses things like Terraform. Is that correct? Can you help me clear up, like, for in my mind, all these different ways to deploy and manage to the cloud, where Firefly sits?
Firefly is a cloud asset management platform, what you can also call now a cloud automation platform. If you touch the cloud, you need Firefly because we help you get visibility into everything you have, map what's managed, what's unmanaged, detects and fix drifts, compliance, auto remediation. All of that is a part of the same cloud lifecycle. From the moment you have a new resource, then all the changes that you have the day zero, day one, day two, right? Day three, where you have a problem, day four, where you have to solve it, and so on and so forth, right? When you're doing cleanups and optimizations. So we are your cloud copilot in a way, right? Also, AI is a part of that. Your cloud copilot, I think, is also a very good analogy.
Okay, good. So Firefly as a co-pilot, it you can ask it questions and it'll give you answers, that kind of thing. It's a little more easy to interact with. All right, cool. I think I got it. We've been talking for a bit now, and I wanted to get a little bit deeper with you because I saw your analysis of an incident that I thought was super interesting. It was the Unisuper Google Cloud incident where I had read about it, and Google Cloud had deleted one of their clients' resources, and it was a big thing. But you wrote up a little discussion about it, and can you kind of give us the background on it, what your take on it was, and how IAC really should have prevented that almost? I think, right?
Exactly, Paul. So I touched on that a bit before about disaster recovery in the cloud. So we all know backup and restore solutions, right? Mainly for data. It's not a new thing. We There are many vendors doing it, right? And Unisuper, they had data backup, but when they got all their infrastructure deleted and even the backup for their infrastructure deleted, they had the data, but they couldn't do anything about it, right? Because of the fact that they had to restore their infrastructure. And that would be a very, very manual thing to do if you don't have IaC. If you have IaC in place and if you have IaC modularized, right, you'll be able to run, okay, Terraform apply, new account, restore data, continue. Instead of that, it took them a lot of time to get back on their feet. And it's not the first time we see that. I don't know if you've seen it, but MGM Studios, I think, looked for sysadmins working in shifts and getting a lot of money just to restore VMs because of the breach they had or whatever. I don't remember anymore, but we see that all the time. And you have to make sure that when you have a disaster recovery plan in place, it will take the infrastructure into account. Because I can give you your data, but if you have your data and you don't have where to put it, then you can't continue to work. You cannot restore your services, and at the end of the day, it will just cost you a lot of money. I think that's what it's all about. That's why we truly evangelize the usage of infrastructure as code, even if you don't buy Firefly, right? We push that very hard. We talk about it all the time. And again, we're working with those influencers and putting some marketing budgets on that because we feel it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for your cloud. It's the right thing to do to prevent your next incident for your customers, for your employees and engineers. It's just the right thing to do, just like you manage code with Git, just like you manage your expenses with whatever. I think it's a must have.
Perfect. Yeah, that was such a wild thing to read about, and I think for all engineers, we keep up with the news because we feel a little good, like it wasn't our system, like that wasn't mine, like mine's still okay, uh and it is that extra peace of mind that infrastructure as code gives me when I talk to folks that are very split between software development and like infrastructure. right? They're like two totally separate things, but I want them to understand that it's combined now. Like you want your front end and your application developers to have the ability to manage their deployments and manage their resources so that they have like dev and staging and prod parity, right? Their local environment is exactly the same as production. You can totally do that with infrastructure as code and properly set up cloud resources. And I think that's amazing. And infrastructure as code is definitely the game changer for cloud, right? And we're going to see more and more different solutions come out as these abstractions start to get a little bit higher and we get even beyond what is a cloud. Like, I would love one day for AWS to go completely regionless. Like, I don't have to choose US East or Hong Kong or whatever. It should just know based on where the client is pinging from, and it should auto like mesh throughout the entire world. Like, that's my dream for managing global IaC. What sort of future dreams do you have about IaC, and where do you see like Firefly really expanding and taking advantage of these new ideas coming out?
I'm really connecting with what you just said. I think that a cloud will be a commodity in the future. You need a Kubernetes cluster with this and that RAM, with this and that CPUs. I don't care where it is. I care it's secured, right? So I don't care where it is. I just want to have it. And I think Firefly should be there and will be there. We already had a POC, a nice preview feature with migration between clouds, right? Which is not something easy at all. But I think once we go more Kubernetes or serverless, it will be easier to do that, to really abstract the cloud provider. That's where we're getting. I think we um, got there with networking as a service, right? You don't know which router is running your data in AWS. It's virtualized, and it's not like, old days of networking. Juniper, Cisco, which one you're using? I got my Cisco certification. That was I think about 15 years ago. I started doing those things, and back then Cisco was like, a huge thing. I wanted to get their expert level. And then 15 years later, I don't see any network engineer around me. It's all as a service, right? DBAs would be those longest serving engineers in an organization handling those indexing things and backup and everything. Now it's all as a service, right? In 15 years from now, nobody will care. Nobody will care where your Kubernetes cluster runs. It will be 10 times cheaper, 10 times stronger, and AI will reach a certain level where everything is so much easier. You'll have companies worth billions of dollars with only just a few people working there. And we see it today, regardless of just Firefly or IaC, or I think AI is something we all have to embrace, right? It's not a matter of if you should work with AI, if you should know how to engineer your prompts with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, right? If you're not doing it today, you will probably not have a job tomorrow. We see it in the cloud. We see it with writing code and developers and no code with AI mix. Um, and we just see it everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's going the box is open. It's not going back. It's a one-way operation once you turn on the AI faucet. And I'm here for it. I love it. I think some people don't know how to use it quite well enough yet. So the less optimal implementations of AI are really bad. Like when you see bad AI, it's really bad. But really good AI, you don't even notice it. right? Like that's for me how I like to use it. Because if you're just doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're not even gonna even notice that I'm not real right now.
Correct. I think it's a mix. It's a mix of non-AI validations wrapping a very good prompt, and we'll see agents doing this back and forth with different prompts, different models, optimizing everything. Um, as of today, the strongest thing I've seen with AI is Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and it's probably the weakest one we've seen so far in terms of what we'll see in the future.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. So that's awesome. Well, I have a super important question now. We've gone over, business stuff, security, compliance, technical things, but now it's time to get down to brass tacks. Serious question. What Guinness World Record would you want to achieve if you had enough time and money to dedicate to it?
Oh my God.
Because now it's all about like balancing frisbees on, a thumbtack or something. And like they just get wilder and wilder. So what would you pick?
You know what, Paul? I read this amazing book about the history of schooling for kids. And I don't know if I can call it a Guinness record, but I think the system is something that should be different. I always tell myself I wanted to know all the things I know today when I was 10 and 15, right? Years old, about finance, about food, about everything, about how the world works, right? And I think that my world record would be inventing this new system that really prepares people to the real life, right? And that would be leveraging tech in a good way, knowing finance from a young age, and all other real life skills that I think schools are lacking today. I think that there's this great, amazing research about literacy, English literacy. When people started going to school, it dropped. When people before school, they boys would go with their fathers to work at the shop, and they would learn reading and writing, not with a class instructor, just from life, right? The way we learn how to speak and understand language, no one is like standing with like teaching us how to speak. We just get it, right? It's called open source learning, and I am a true believer in that. And I think that in a very very progressive world that is capitalistic, and everything is like so different than it used to be, I think we need better education for everyone. And my record would be maybe start the largest new age public school or something like that.
The most amount of students taught. You could you would just hit the ground running, teach people day in and day out, and get the most amount of students taught in a year or something. That would be kind of fun. Awesome. All right, Naor, it's been about an hour. We've had a great conversation. I'm so glad we could reconnect about Guinness World Records and you teaching things, IaC, compliance, all of that stuff. Do you have any final like shout outs or things that you wanted to mention before we wrap things up today?
I want to thank you for your time, Paul, and your great energy. Meeting you every time is fantastic. And I want to encourage all of you to use infrastructure as code with or without Firefly. And good luck with managing your cloud. Bring your cloud up to code and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Hope you enjoyed listening.
All right. Well, thanks, Naor. You've been listening to Talking Serverless, a podcast where we talk about serverless. My name is Paul Chin Jr. I'm a senior serverless developer, and this episode has been presented by Serverless Guru. Thanks a lot. Catch you on the next episode. Bye, everybody.